All right, I think we are live. Hello, everybody who is watching. Um, I'm going to get right into this because we're just playing around with this format. My name is Hemant Mehta. I run Friendly Atheist. And if any of you are watching right now, I know we're still going live on a bunch of different places. If you have questions along the way, please leave them in the comments and we will get to them as the interview continues. And I'll go ahead and get started now. You all know my guest, Katherine Stewart, because she's been the canary in the coal mine when it comes to Christian nationalism. In 2020, just before that year's presidential election, she published The Power Worshippers, all about the threat of that movement. It even inspired the documentary God and Country. If you can believe it, her new book is even scarier than the last one, in part because Katherine is really good at knowing what's coming down the pipeline. It's called Money, Lies, and God Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. It is a lighthearted, illustrated children's book. I'm kidding, it's terrifying. But it's also clarifying because she contextualizes what we are seeing in the news right now. The book really shows the connection between Christian nationalism, wealth, and the death of American democracy. So let me bring Katherine in here. Hello, how are you doing?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for doing this. Let me start off by just asking you, your title is Money, Lies, and God. What is the bigger problem right now? Is it billionaires using the treasury as an ATM or Christian nationalists using their majorities to impose their faith on everyone else? Like, should I be more worried about the funders or the fundies?
Well, they're all really important. I titled the book Money, Lies, and God because first, money is a huge part of the story, meaning that huge concentrations of wealth at the very tippy top of the economic spectrum have really destabilized the political system in interesting ways. And there's a sector, there are a lot of very rich people in America, but only a sector of the very rich have invested a portion of their fortunes in anti-democratic projects, and they're the ones sort of funding this movement. Second, lies or conscious disinformation, propaganda is another really huge feature of this movement. And number three, God, because the most important ideological framework for the largest part of this movement is Christian nationalism. Religious nationalism plays a central role because for the rank and file, it's really a key way of legitimizing their support for the movement. This is a movement that quite clearly has set itself against the Constitution and America's democratic ideals, but leaders of the movement know that they need to kind of get the rank and file on board, and many of them have been brought up to be deeply patriotic. So Christian nationalism is kind of a form of identity politics, and it's a way to get them in on that sort of agenda.
I've been really interested in that merger, it seems, between the religious side and the patriotic side. You've been reporting and writing about this movement for several years. I've been doing the same thing. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, how has that movement changed over the past few decades, especially in terms of priorities and access?
Oh my gosh, such a big question, such a great question. The movement has shifted and has, I would say, unprecedented political power today because of the investment in the movement over the last few decades. The amounts of money are enormous. I mean, I started writing about this movement in 2016. As you know, the movement is leadership driven and also organization driven. There are all of these different organizations that work together to make up the movement. And I'll just give you one example. I think when I started researching this movement, the annual operating budget of the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is one of the key legal advocacy organizations of the religious right, was something like $30 million a year, which was a lot. Today, it's over $102 million a year. So the amounts of money have really ballooned thanks to funders like Barry Seid, a Chicago billionaire who donated $1.6 billion, that's billion with a B, to form the Marble Freedom Trust, and he put Leonard Leo in charge of it. So a lot of money buys a lot of law, a lot of money buys a lot of disinformation operations, it buys a lot of lies, and it sort of gets everybody on board. I mean, this is an incredibly well-funded movement, and as a consequence of all that funding and organization, they have unprecedented political power.
Is that funding coming primarily from religious zealots who want to impose their religious will on the country, or is it coming from like wealthy Republicans who don't actually care about religion, but they see it as a useful tool?
I think two things can be both true. I mean, when I feature the funders of the movement, I'm talking about people like the Corkerys or Sean Filer, who are Catholic. I'm talking about Barry Seid and Jeff Yass, who are both Jewish, I believe. I'm thinking about people like the DeVos Prince family juggernaut, who or I would think about like Tim Dunn or the Wilkes brothers, or Richard Uihlein. I think, well, maybe you.
He's from my home state of Illinois.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, like those are not religious figures as far as I've ever known them. Those are political figures.
Well, some of them really are. I mean, some of these funders are really religious, but religiously, they're all over the place, right? They're evangelical, they're Protestant, they're Catholic. A couple of them are Jewish. Some of them are actually, when you dig into it, like they really seem to believe in nothing more than themselves. I'm looking at you, Elon Musk. But what they're really doing is kind of investing a portion of their fortunes in these anti-democratic projects. And what they want, is they want economic policies that are going to justify and increase their wealth. They want a deregulatory environment for their businesses. If they're in polluting businesses, they don't want any environmental regulations. Some of them care about the culture wars more than others. Some of them don't seem to care about them at all. They just see it as the price of doing business. We get the little people on board with by dangling the shiny baubles of the culture wars in front of them. But they're, basically united in their desire to crush liberalism and what they call the administrative state.
One of the things that always surprises me is every time there is a new poll out about religion in the United States, it always seems to show that there is a shift away from organized religion. And there is a rise in people who are non-religious, whatever label they used to call themselves. Can you explain for me, how is it that the number of people who are involved in an organized religion, the percentage of Christians in the United States, that seems to keep going down and down, and yet they seem to also have more power than ever right now?
Well, those polls are a little bit deceptive, because what we're seeing is a kind of thinning out of the moderate middle in a lot of religions. If you look at like the mainline Christian denominations, they're graying and they're getting older, and they're sort of not going to church as often. But you have more of a rise of the sort of the hotter and harder forms of religion are on the rise. And when I say hotter, I mean sort of more reactionary, sort of like this idea of a strong God, a sort of more authoritarian form of religion. Like, for instance, one of the fastest growing religious movements in America is sort of these independent charismatic movements, which are themselves quite diverse, but like a very large sector of the independent charismatic movements are very easily given over to hard right politics.
Are we talking about like the Greg Locks, those types of guys who are just very in your face? They preach almost more politics than anything else, but they're very much, we're going to get rid of the devil. Satan is responsible for anything.
Well, when I talk about independent charismatic movements, I'm talking about people like Lance Wallnau and everybody sort of in his sphere. And the New Apostolic Reformation, for instance, which is one example of a kind of this type of religion. And many of folks on this in this kind of sphere believe in seven mountains dominionism, the idea that only Christians of a certain type, a certain reactionary variety, should dominate the key features or mountains or molders, as they call it, of culture, which includes government, education, media, finance, and things like that. So it's a very anti-democratic ideology. And yes, there you've got the sort of John MacArthur's or the other folks who are representative of very sort of strict and reactionary forms of the Christian faith, which are also growing their networks. And meanwhile, sort of like this sort of more progressive Christian networks tend to be sort of dying out or thinning out.
This
And
is
then
a oh,
along with that comes a rise of people who don't identify with any religion as well, and that group too is very diverse in its relationship to religion and non-religion.
this is a question that a viewer is curious about. What do they want to do with people who disagree? Like live and let live as long as they get to make the rules, or something more nefarious?
Well, I think that overall, what the movement leaders want to do is have a kind of almost like an imposed state form of religion. They want to convey the idea that there's a correct religion, one with a sort of national, national stamp of approval, and an incorrect religion. They want to impose their values on our healthcare. They want to be able to impose their values on all aspects of our society. And in our public schools, they want to infuse public schools with a sort of approved religion, approved version of the Christian faith. And then, the implication will be that, all others are tolerated but disfavored. So, religious nationalism is a form of reactionary nationalism. It's this idea of who gets to properly belong in the country and who doesn't. It's actually a threat to the religious freedom of those who fail to conform to what the movement leaders see as their approved versions of the faith. And by the way, they're really taking aim at progressive forms of Christianity. The way I do my research is, is I spend a lot of time in these spaces, and I was recently at the most recent event I attended was called America Fest. It's held by Turning Point USA Faith. Turning Point USA, which is Charlie Kirk's organization. He plays a huge role in voter turnout operations. He also plays a huge role in bringing young people into the movement. And there's an arm called Turning Point USA Faith, and the head of it, Lucas Miles. He spoke on a couple of occasions at America Fest, and I heard him both times, and he said, "I've made it my mission to eradicate woke Jesus from the American pulpit." I mean, and he actually, or woke Christianity, and he actually has a book he's titled Woke Jesus, and the subtitle is something like The Heresy Infecting the Christian Church, or something like that.
So goodbye to the Sermon on the Mount, and pretty much.
My gosh, I mean, he spoke very explicitly, like what counts as heretical. He says, he literally described progressive Christianity as heretical, and he named the social gospel, which for many Christians is the gospel. So, and he said, we want to see progressive churches defunded. So I think when you look at sort of what's happening now in our government with all the sort of chaos with the, Elon Musk's 19-year-old minions marauding through the treasury and going after grandma's Social Security or whatever they're doing, we've also seen defunding of a lot of faith-based organizations that are doing charity work, feeding the poor, trying to help people with housing and other services, because those organizations are more on the sort of, I would say, moderate or progressive side.
Yeah, we just saw a lot of that with the firing of U.S. aid workers all over the world.
Right.
One of the things you write in the book, you say that this movement, this Christian nationalist movement, and I'm quoting here, represents the most serious threat to American democracy since the Civil War. And I'm wondering, why isn't that threat being felt by everyone? Like, I feel like I hear about it in my more progressive circles, but you would think, okay, if this is something like the Civil War, everyone has sides, everyone's eager to fight because they all believe they're right. And yet I feel for so many Americans, they have no clue what's going on. They don't even realize this war is happening. And I know you're trying to sound the alarm here, but most people don't seem to feel the threat. Or am I wrong on that assessment?
Well, I think that what's happening, all you need to do is open the news and read the news, and how Trump and his minions are, decapitating leadership at the CIA and the FBI, how they're eliminating, agencies that protect the consumer, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or that's like a consumer fraud bureau that has actually returned billions of dollars to Americans that has been illegally taken from them by different businesses, and they're eliminating that. They're slashing key functions of our government that we rely on to do everything from protect our nuclear weapons to keep the planes in the air to collect taxes. I mean, look, of course there's room for some kind of improvement in government sector as there is in the private sector. I mean, maybe you could cut 5% of the workforce and everybody works a little harder and it's fine. But if you keep cutting and cutting and cutting and replacing some of the most, frankly, competent people with loyalist incompetence, at a certain point, things are just going to stop working. And I think that, a lot of people voted for Trump because they justified their vote on the price of eggs. The price of eggs isn't going down. Well, it's still not going down. Price of goods is predicted to rise as a consequence of Trump's needless trade wars. He's already alienated some of our, most dear allies of the past 80 years. He's insulted Canada and Greenland and Panama. I mean, anybody who's not paying attention to this is just not paying attention at all.
So if they haven't felt it yet, they're going to feel it very soon.
This is absolutely true. I mean, maybe they're not looking at the news, but they'll certainly feel it when they see the price of cars rise because we're starting some needless trade war with Canada. I mean, this is something that authoritarian leaders do. They start these sort of needless projects of aggression on overseas, because what they need to do is, they run on promises of vengeance, and they need to target their aggression, and often they'll target it on sort of inappropriate targets abroad. So this is one of the things about authoritarian leaders. They're often very expansionist, and often just the whole point is the aggression itself.
So you're mentioning some of the political groups like Turning Point, USA Faith, that is going against woke Jesus and anyone they feel is too progressive, even in religious circles. What have you found in like white evangelical churches in terms of how they've become more political? Like, do the culture wars no longer matter as much as like MAGA-ism? Has there been that shift, or is it just, no, we're still fighting the same culture war battles we always have, but now we're just adding a new element to it? What have you seen there?
Yeah, the culture wars matter more than ever, and they do it to justify their support for MAGA. They claim that the country's on the brink of total apocalypse because of a woke elite that wants to change your gender against their will, and kids are going to go to public schools and their libraries are filled with pornography, like all of these lies, right? And they use these lies, or they'll find some little piece of truth here, but they'll blow it up into be this huge thing, whereas it's a little thing that really doesn't affect the way the overwhelming majority of people live. And they'll use that to convince their people that this is what all liberals want, or anyone who's a rhino, anyone who's not on board with their agenda, anybody remotely to the left of them. They say they're all woke communists, and we need to save America from this, satanic agenda. And therefore, that justifies clearing the way for a more authoritarian leader who doesn't have to respect the rules, who moves the goalposts all the time, who's breaking norms, and who's violating laws. What they do is they say that America's on the brink of an apocalypse because of this wokeness in the radical left. They say democracy can't solve our problems and the rules don't apply anymore. So we need an authoritarian leader who puts himself above the law, who's going to seize the reins of power and scrap the rule of law in favor of an iron fist.
To that end, how important is Jesus anymore to the types of Christians who subscribe to any of this? Is that just an ancillary character now, or do they just warp Jesus to be more like Trump?
I'm going to leave the theological disputes to the theologians. I have to say that I have seen folks in those spaces worshiping with as much intensity and passion as anyone. But as we know, Christianity is a very diverse faith, just like every other faith is very diverse in its different expressions and interpretations. But one thing I will say is that it's hard to overstate the degree to which the politics leads the religion and not the other way around.
That's interesting. I don't know if you saw this past week. I talked about it on earlier YouTube shows and stuff, but I'm curious about what sort of resistance is coming from the Christian side to all the stuff you are writing about. We saw a little of this at Wheaton College recently when the school just said congratulations to Russell Vaught for being appointed whatever the to a high level position, and a bunch of people said this guy is not the best of our school. Basically, we should not be congratulating this dude for basically giving Trump the ammo he wants to impose Project 2025. That's a small form of resistance coming from a relatively conservative area. But is there any sort of real resistance coming up in those same circles? People who are worried that maybe their religion is being hijacked by the politics, even if they agree on a lot of it.
Yeah, listen, there are a lot of groups that are really standing up to object, but they don't have the funding and they don't have the organizational capacity. I feel like this is a movement that's as powerful as it is because of 5+ decades of investment in this project. And I feel like for a long time, folks on the other side of the political aisle, frankly, just ignored it. It made people feel uncomfortable, or they would explain it away. I remember one of George Bush's speechwriters, George W. speechwriters, he said, this is a movement that could fit into a phone booth. He said that dismissing Michelle Goldberg's very prescient, I think it was 2006 or 2007 book, Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism. And he was deriding her. He's like, oh, this isn't anything we need to pay attention to. Well, this is a movement that for a long time, the Republican Party thought we can make use of them. They deliver a lot of votes to us. And so we can, they'll be on our side. Where else are they going to go? Well, this movement, it's existed outside of the Republican Party in most respects, but it's also seized control of the Republican Party at this point, because it said, this movement leader said to Republican politicians, if you don't support our policies, we will primary you. And so the only way that Republicans could actually win elections in these very deeply gerrymandered districts is by not letting anyone run to the right of them. So as a consequence, we have a situation today where the guardrails have completely fallen off the Republican Party, and this movement is really dominating it. Look, a true conservative movement would want to preserve institutions of value that have really served our country over time. It would want to, would prize the integrity of the judiciary. It'd want to support and preserve and improve public education, not just smash it up. It would want to improve the functioning of government and not just smash it up. But this is, again, a movement that doesn't believe in democracy in the sense of a government as representative of the people. It doesn't respect individual rights in a pluralistic society. And that's really at the core. They don't respect that. So they say this kind of government doesn't give us what we want. We want to smash it up and create something new, an autocracy.
To that end, one of the things that has frustrated me to no end is the number of Democrats, moderate Democrats, who have said, well, we can work with Donald Trump because, like, Doge and cutting fraud, that's a good idea. So let's work together on things maybe we do overlap on. One of the things you write in your book is that trying to compromise, and this is the word you use, is a delusion. This is what you said. American democracy is failing because it is under direct attack, and the attack is not coming equally from both sides. The movement described in this book is not looking for a seat at the noisy table of American democracy. It wants to burn down the house. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the Democrats right now who are saying, no, we need to resist Trumpism in all of its forms. I don't even know what my question is. I'm wondering why more Democrats, progressives, even Republicans who oppose what Trump is doing, why haven't they gotten the message on this that it's not just morally sound to oppose what's going on, but it's good for them politically, because I think a lot of people really want to see pushback.
Yeah, there's a lot of pushback right now. I mean, the lawyers seem really busy. A few days ago, it was 50 lawsuits, and some of them were really landing. What I've heard is that, the idea is there's going to be damage. But if we can slow roll this, look, we've got elections in less than 2 years. And a lot of the actions of the current administration are unconstitutional and against the law, unlawful. Democracy relies on professional government staffed with individuals who are subject to ethics constraints, and they act on the basis of reason and evidence in accordance with the law. And this is why the movement leaders have long ago declared war on what they call the administrative state. They want to smash it up. They want to basically, Russell Vogt himself, who you mentioned, said he wants to leave government officials in trauma. They really are.
Like Jesus wanted.
What they're doing, they're actually purging the government of some of the most talented people, and people who have options, who are going to be like, I don't want to work with this. I'm going to take my fork and go work somewhere else. But what they're going to leave is loyalists and incompetence. And we see this, like they justify some of their, anti-DEI measures as about merit. Well, this means, what does merit mean? They fired a 4-star general with deep experience and replaced him with a lesser known, with much less expensive 3-star general who's been sucking up to Trump and his family members for a very long time. So you've got somebody, and they're calling this anti-DEI. I mean, this DEI stuff, Hammett, to be sure, there are some diversity programs and, trainings, whatever, that bear scrutiny, but that's not what this is about. This is basically about providing a smokescreen for a money grab and a power grab, and it's providing cover for racism and also for a total war on anti-discrimination law.
That's the thing that bugs me, that they always use the idea like, we want to get rid of fraud. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but they use that as cover for what they actually want to do, which is just get rid of everything and everyone they feel is just not 100% loyal to them.
And they're also getting rid of the agencies that are intended to or have been created to root out fraud.
Right.
And, the idea is that, Trump declared himself the king, and he, repeated some quote attributed to Napoleon that said, the man, I don't have it in front of me, the man who saves the country, or the leader who saves the country is not breaking any laws or something.
Right. He can get away with anything. He's the king, things like that.
Sadly, Anders Breivik, that horrible mass murderer, paraphrased the same, quote.
So to that end, like, we have seen how this administration is destroying the government, trying to, from the inside, firing people whose jobs they don't understand. But when it comes to religion, what should we expect is coming down the pipeline? Like, how are they going to enact conservative Christian beliefs and try to make them the default setting for our country?
Oh, where do we start? I mean, can we start with public schools?
That literally was the next question on my list.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movement that wants to open the floodgates for taxpayer funding of religious schools. They've been trying to do this for years. It's been a longstanding aim of the movement to, through vouchers and other means, but now they're developing a case in Oklahoma, St. Isidore Academy. It's a fully taxpayer-funded religious charter school, and they want to, the Supreme Court has agreed to take this case. And public K through 12, it's a lot of money that goes into that, because the nation's children need to be educated. And movement leaders know if they can capture a portion of that, then the money will flow without end, which is one of the reasons they've been so intent on not just siphoning money from the public schools, but also fostering mistrust in public education with their sort of fake CRT stuff, and alleging that public school textbooks are filled with pornography and the like. And they do that to soften the ground for a wholesale assault. And at the same time, they're also trying to force their programming into public schools. We've seen this with the Ten Commandments laws, with the law in Texas that says if we'll give you extra money if you teach the sectarian Bible curriculum in public schools, and through a lot of different other means.
In Oklahoma, one of the things I was just working on today, Ryan Walters, the superintendent of public instruction there, just put out a call for bids for companies that want to create Bible-based values curriculum. As long as you could provide it, we'll give you taxpayer money for it, but it's in the early stages right now. Um, I think you actually mentioned, and one of the books behind you is the Good News Club, which you wrote about this organization that's launching basically after school, before school clubs to indoctrinate kids with the Bible. But I think one of the things you mentioned in that book was called the 4 to 14 window, where they really try to get them young. And now they have the mechanism to just go into public schools themselves. They don't need to do that from the outside. They can just try to infuse the Bible through public schools in a way they never could before. And that is somehow even more frightening than what you wrote about in the Good News Club.
Yeah, 4 to 14 window is a strategy that Louis Bush came up with. He's one of the movement strategists. Have you ever heard of like the 1040 window? It was the area between 10 and 40 north longitude that was identified as a place where the most, they call them, unreached people groups live. So he came up with this sort of 414 window strategy. 1040 window strategy, and all these he's like a sort of high level mission strategist, and all these missionaries went to those parts of the globe to establish churches and try and convert people. Well, a few years later, he came up with this idea of the 414 window, which is you get them when you're young, they're young, you can keep them for life. And he said, he wrote a book, which I have somewhere in my bookshelf. And he said, in the introduction, a fellow who wrote it named Wes Stafford, who was sort of allied with Louis Bush, who tapped to write the introduction. He said, even the Taliban places great emphasis on recruiting children. And then he said, may God join you in his fight in his battle for the little ones. And he said, Nazi Germany did this, and Taliban does this. We need to do it too.
And this is something the right accuses the left of, that you're indoctrinating them in secularism from age 4 or whatever as children. Therefore, we need to be reactionary to counter the state mandated atheism that you're already imposing on kids.
Have you spent any time in public schools? First of all, prayer has never been made illegal in public schools. Kids are free to pray whenever they want. It's the
they can read the Bible whenever they want.
They can read the Bible. It's not about that. It's really about the school cannot, they don't believe in the idea of a religiously neutral space. And to sort of understand that, I had to read a lot of theology. It was very interesting. I read some of the Dutch Reform writers, people like Von Til and other folks, and sort of this idea that there is no neutrality. You're either with our religion or, you're under the thumb of Satan, right? And this is why they don't like public schools. Public schools are meant to be religiously neutral, neither affirming nor denigrating any particular form of religion, including any particular form of Christianity. And they don't like that. They don't like that public schools teach kids how to get along with other kids, including those who are different.
They treat neutrality as oppression.
They treat neutrality as oppression. Anything that fails to affirm them is construed as oppressive to them. And this is so important for understanding how the movement works. They have persuaded many of the rank and file that conservative Christians are the most persecuted group in American society. Now, if you look at the statistics about who gets attacked, it's not conservative Christians. If you look at statistics about who gets discriminated against in the workplace or anywhere else, in healthcare settings,
I would love to have as much discrimination as conservative Christians do in Congress. Please, I'll swap places. Which group do they think is more oppressed than them that they would like to switch places with? We talk a lot when we talk about conservative Christians, we typically think of Southern Baptists, white evangelicals, and the like. Can you talk about the role that conservative Catholics have in this movement, if it's any different than what we're seeing in the other types of churches?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I mean, I think that the role of conservative Catholics is underappreciated. People often talk about this as a white evangelical movement, but it's not exclusively white. And it's not exclusively about evangelicals, even though white evangelicals did vote for Trump in extraordinarily large numbers. But the movement would be nowhere without a cadre of ultra-conservative Catholic leaders who have often, just look at the Supreme Court. Look at Leonard Leo, an ultra-conservative Catholic whose role as a money man for the religious right has really built up that right-wing legal ecosphere. On the conservative side, you have a lot of very vital thinkers of the movement who've provided a kind of intellectual infrastructure or scaffolding for aspects of the movement. Now, American Catholics are, of course, the jump ball of American politics. They sort of vote everywhere, divided nearly evenly, right to left or, center, whatever. But they, here's the thing. Within the Catholic hierarchy, there's been a real crisis in recent years. Like I would say the Pope, who is, very ill right now, is not, you can't call him a progressive, but at the same time, he's more progressive, specifically on the environment and also perhaps on certain socioeconomic issues than other parts of the Catholic hierarchy. So there has been a real sort of schism within the Catholic Church. And even within that, there's an additional schism where you have a lot of the Catholic hierarchy that has been completely discredited because of the Catholic Church's complicity in these horrible child abuse scandals and sex abuse scandals. So the Catholic hierarchy has actually lost a lot of credibility with the laity. But, within, like power hates a vacuum. At the same time, you have this sector of ultra-conservative Catholic laity that has kind of stepped up to fill in the gap, and they're funding things like Eternal EWTN. It's like ultra-conservative. It's like been described as like the Fox News of the Catholic world. You have them funding groups like Legatus or Compact or other. I'm sorry, not Compact. Is I can't remember the name of that organization. Or
Okay,
a
but
whole
there are a lot of conservative Catholic outlets that are pushing for their viewpoint too. And I am worried that when the current Pope dies, which could be very soon, it's only going to make an already conservative church even more conservative.
There is definitely a war within the church where there's a more, I would say, more progressive element. And then, of course, an ultra conservative element as well. And a lot of the very wealthy Catholic laity are pushing to sort of drag the church to the right and fuse it with a kind of pro-capitalist ideology.
This is hyper specific, but Trump recently came out with an executive order to form an anti-Christian bias task force, going back to that idea that conservative Christians are really the ones being persecuted. Is that, I mean, we can laugh about that and be like, there's really no anti-Christian bias, certainly not in the government. I actually went through his executive order, and the literal examples he gives of that bias are steeped in lies and misinformation. But is
like
all,
I'm really curious. Give me an example.
Oh my God. I mean, some of the stuff they said, the most famous example, the most eye-popping example was that the FBI was targeting a conservative Catholic and linking that person to like a terrorist organization. But when you looked at what the FBI people actually did, they were like, this dude's on our radar. He's said some horrible things online. He's gotten weapons. We believe he's going to act on this. Oh, and by the way, he joined this church that claims to be very conservative Catholic. They're actually not even affiliated with the Catholic Church because they don't believe in the current Pope's legitimacy and whatnot. However, we just want to know if that church is something he's using as a recruiting tool, things like that. When the FBI agents spoke to the leaders of that church, they're all like, are you here to talk about like Bob? Because he freaks us out.
Oh, so, that's really interesting.
Yeah, even they were like, this dude's kind of bad and he's creeping us out. And the thing is, that was one guy. They actually found a couple other people separate from that guy who were attending similar churches. And the analyst basically said, look, this is maybe something we want to look out for because this may be a recruiting space that these types of people are using. And when a version of that report was sent to like superiors. Someone leaked it. And of course, Republican politicians are like, they're going after conservative Catholics. Look, in the document, it says they like a Latin mass. And so clearly they're just going after. This is an example that Trump mentioned of
This guy
anti-Christian bias.
for like a terrorist act, for a
But
domestic act.
But the point I'm trying to make, of course, is they weren't going after Catholics. They weren't even going after conservative Catholics. I am wondering, when it comes to executive orders like the Anti-Christian Bias Task Force, part of me thinks that this thing will form, he'll get the headlines he wants out of it, and at the end of the day, they will just say, hey, guess what? We could say Merry Christmas in the government now, so we solve the problems and that's it, and it's purely symbolic and nothing actually happens. But is there any fear that these types of executive orders can actually do more damage, or is it just window dressing and symbolism just to get people off of his case with, we'll feed you a little something to keep you occupied?
That we can't discount this. I mean, look at one of the first things that Trump did when he was elected is actually pardoning the January 6th coup attempters, domestic terrorists who stormed the Capitol and assaulted police officers. And he did this as a way of saying, hey, and some of them, are members of these groups like Proud Boys, which didn't start off as a religious group, but sort of adopted a more Christian nationalist rhetoric over time as they realized that it was sort of how much power the movement had and how it could sort of help them in their in their organization. So, and then he also pardoned a number of anti-abortion activists who had violently opposed, not just, standing outside of clinics and shouting, but like used physical objects to bar people from entering and stop them from getting health care, and then actually resulting in personal injury to at least one.
That was actually another literal example he gave as anti-Christian bias, that those people who are harassing clinic workers and people entering that abortion clinic, he said, well, they arrested an old woman who was just trying to peacefully pray and protest or whatever. It's like, that's not what they were doing at all.
These people repeatedly violated the law. They're lawbreakers. So they weren't operating, as anti-abortion protesters within the law. They were doing stuff that is legally unlawful, that was unlawful. And he's basically saying, hey, if you are of the right religion and you're on my side and you're working for me, I will reward you. It's a way of trying to create a kind of like a brown shirts or something like that, a kind of people who will operate outside the law on his behalf. So
since we're talking about abortion, Trump recently said he wants to expand in vitro fertilization. He issued maybe it's another executive order, but he said, I'm going to put together a committee to give me recommendations, which is always what presidents say when they don't actually want to do anything, but they want to pretend like they are. I am curious if that sort of thing that he thinks is good politics is actually going to alienate some of his staunch anti-abortion allies, even though it's purely symbolic and won't lead to anything. It's like, maybe there's hope.
Well, it's really interesting. It's not in vitro fertilization itself that they don't like. It's the fact that some of the, whatever diploid zygotes that are created through in vitro or fetuses are discarded after. So they see it as setting up the conditions for what they think is baby murder, because like through in vitro, people often create a lot of fetus embryos.
A lot of embryos that they might have to discard down the line.
Right. So they think that discarding is the problematic. But it's like Trump knows you can't take what he says with any thinking there's any sincerity into it. He's playing politics. I remember he was speaking at one of the big conferences last summer, and he was speaking about abortion to a group of true believers. And he was saying, look, first we got to win elections, and it's all good. Because I think people were concerned with, you just said it's going to go to the states. Is that enough? And he was like, listen, first we're going to win elections, and it's all going to work out in the end. So he's basically saying, you guys are going to get everything what you want, which is a total ban on abortion nationwide. but I got to win an election, and I can't do it if I, you know, campaign on a policy that is, by the way, not popular even among most Republicans. I
Right.
mean, most Americans, Republican and Democrat alike, support abortion, reproductive rights and abortion rights, at least in some form. So, but the folks who are sort of behind that anti-abortion movement are extreme. I mean, they talk about actually, they believe that certain forms of birth control, that prohibit implantation, count as abortion. So it's very, I don't know to say, it goes against any definition of what pregnancy is. But I think the
Turns
rule
out
is,
when you get rid of all the scientists, you're going to get some very bad information.
this is absolutely true. But I think that I've attended gatherings where a number of them have said we need to bring consequences back into sex and eliminate recreational sex.
Right.
So this is for them a great tool for that. Eliminate the most popular and effective forms of birth control, and all of a sudden, you're controlling people's their lives in their bedrooms.
This is a question I'm curious about. This book just came out this month, but obviously you were working on it for at least the past few years, I imagine. One person is asking a question: was there something specific that led you to start writing about this? But I'm also wondering, like, what would you have done had Kamala Harris won the election? Because it's not that the fundamentals of your book would have changed very much. And obviously, I mean, I hate to say this is great timing for your book, but I'm wondering what led to you writing this particular book about this particular topic to answer this question, and also what would have happened if the election had gone the other way?
Those are really good questions. So the first question is, what led to this project? I mean, the book really followed pretty organically from my reporting as I kept research. Look, the first book I wrote, published in this area, Good News Club, was about the war on public education. And then I realized the war on public education was one part of a much larger war on, modern American democracy. And I really explored the role of Christian nationalism in that, and the power worshippers. But then as I keep doing my research, I started to recognize that what we were really seeing in our politics, especially you see it with Project 2025, as a marriage between the religious right in America and the new right, which is a movement that is, I would say, less explicitly Christian nationalist, but also much more explicitly anti-democratic in some ways. So I realized that there was just a much bigger story. And I also thought I need to sort of make clear that there are different categories of leadership in this movement. And I thought about sort of how to express how they work together in a way to sort of show that the fissures, I mean, this movement isn't always united in everything. They're rowing in the same boat, as it were, but there are a lot of differences that can and should be exploited. So that's what sort of led to Money, Lies, and God. And by the way, had Trump not won the election, I would have totally taken it and been super happy. People are like, what are you talking about? We're going in a different direction. And, you have a couple, maybe my 10 friends and my 10 other family members would have bought copies, but I would have taken it very gladly.
I mean, Leonard Leo would still be doing his thing if Kamala Harris won. All the forces that we are talking about would still have a lot of impact.
They would, but people wouldn't want to think about it, but it would still be happening. This movement I saw Steve Bannon speak recently, and I got to say, he's a good speaker. I know, it's okay. I mean, he was talking to a bunch of young people and activists, and he said, when you lost in 2020, you didn't get into bed and pull up the covers and start sucking your thumbs. You got out there and you decided to fight. And I just thought, well, he's right. Now, of course, they spread lies, and they found new populations to spread their untruths to persuade with their untruths and conspiracism. But they also turned out to vote. They went after low propensity voters. They went after the Amish, for goodness sake, and they got them. No one else bothered to do that. They turned out their base, and they don't start like reaching out to people in September. If the election is in November, they campaign throughout the election
They
cycle,
are
not just
in
the end
your
of it.
if you are in that right-wing ecosystem, they are
Right.
feeding you this information in
All the
every
time.
possible format all the time, and that is
Well,
frightening.
and they're creating a sense of community among their followers, and they're giving people an immediate path to political engagement. And, you know, the books I've written, I remember when Power Worshippers came off, Andrew Seidel said, it's like if the religion, like the Christian nationalist movement, is a watch and you're taking the back off the watch so people can see how it works. And I tried to do that with each of my books to show, here's how they did it. They did it like they actually created a movement. And if they can do it, maybe we can do some of those things too. Like, we wouldn't wish to emulate their most craven tactics. We don't want to inspire political violence. We don't want to spread lies. But that determination to turn out the vote, to sort of educate people about the issues that should matter to them, these are things that we can do, and we can do them throughout the year, every part of the election season.
To that end, I was wondering if conservatives and the religious right has so easily been able to hijack an entire political party, what is preventing progressives from doing that with Democrats and maybe using our power for good? Why is it so hard to find that level of, I don't know, cultist mentality on the other side?
I think there are a couple of issues. I think for a long time, people didn't recognize the nature of the threat that they were facing. I think true conservative Republicans didn't notice it. They said, this is a group, we can make use of them, and then they seized control of the party. And I think a lot of Republicans now feel like they don't even have a party anymore, but they were sort of blindsided by this. I think that it's also hard to unite a very large and disparate group of people who are not, very predisposed to authoritarianism by nature. So they can be quite contentious. At the end of Money, Lies, and God, I have a whole section on what we can do to shore up a democratic movement. And part of it is we need a big tent.
Right. You actually say we could take solace in the fact that we are in the majority and they are divided.
Yes. I think more Americans would like to live in a society with democratic ideals and principles and institutions than want to live in a cronyistic, kleptocratic, autocratic system with authoritarian features and theocratic features. Like, I just don't think that's how most Americans want to live their lives.
Yeah,
And
we
also,
just need them to come out and vote.
yes, well, we need to invest in the infrastructure of a real pro-democracy movement. We need to not purity test one another. We're not going to agree on everything. We shouldn't. It's like a big family. This one wants a pony. She's not going to get it, right? but if we can agree on more than we can disagree on, I think we can work together.
This is a similar question along those lines. What steps can be taken to reclaim democratic values in the U.S.? And are the Democrats capable of doing anything to combat this in the long run? You did address some of this already. I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to add.
Well, I think that one thing I would add is, first of all, yes, people are capable. I think there are no guarantees, but if there's will to be done and sort of strategic moves, then it can be done. And I think that what can ordinary people do? I mean, every day, who are not involved in politics or launching lawsuits or the like, I think it's really important to get involved locally. Sometimes we focus so much on the national picture that we forget what's happening in our own communities. Well, if we don't do that, if we don't take active roles, guess who comes in and does it? It's the Moms for Liberty. So, all the moms screaming at school board members about how they're turning public schools into gender change factories. Not true, of course.
Which is a surprise to anyone who's been in a public school.
They're so busy with reading and math. It's reading and math, more reading and math, and then test prep.
The idea that teachers have the time to do, much less the money to do any of these things that they're being accused of, is hilarious.
I know.
Were you surprised when during the Pete Hegseth confirmation hearings? I was surprised by how little it came up that he has these tattoos that promote a form of like very conservative Christianity. His religious zealotry did not come up nearly as much as I had thought.
Yeah, I wonder if people didn't know how to talk about it. I think the problem is often that people who are liberals or moderates, we all want to be tolerant of one another's religion. We don't want to be against anybody's faith. We understand that religious freedom is a really important principle in this country, and it just is. It's a kind of human right. So I think when we see sort of extremist forms of ideology, if it has a sort of banner, if it falls under the banner of religion, it's hard for a lot of people to talk about it. But if we don't identify, anti-democratic ideologies when they appear, then we are really doing a disservice to the institution of democracy itself and to the religious freedom of people whose rights might be subsumed when a movement seizes control of power and imposes its will and its values on everyone else.
I know your book has only been out for a short while, but I'm wondering if you've heard at all from any Christians, conservative Christians, who may have been surprised by anything they read and they reached out to you about it.
I hear from Christian readers every single day, multiple times a day. And you know what's really interesting is I hear from a lot of pastors in, like, I don't know, I probably shouldn't name it, like states that are like where they're really isolated and they're pastoring these small churches. And all of a sudden they're like really concerned because their congregants are getting all this information from Telegram or YouTube or whatever. And all of a sudden there's all this conspiracism in their church and they don't know how to address it because, first of all, they don't want to lose their position at church. It's hard to be a pastor. You have to pastor the whole church. You're not supposed to take political positions. Of course, the super conservative pastors don't mind doing that. But a lot of these pastors are, I would say there's like small c conservative, they might be, not comfortable with abortion or things like that. But at the same time, when all of a sudden people are talking about the great replacement, or people are talking about, QAnon or things like that, they're really worried. And they reach out to me and they're like, I don't know what to do. I can't lose my job. Who will pay my health insurance? I got kids to raise. I
What do
want
you
to
tell
talk.
them?
I mostly, honestly, I just listen. And there are organizations that I can point them to that are deeply concerned about this stuff. I mean, there's a whole faith-based sphere. I think about people like Amanda Tyler, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, the Baptist Joint Committee, Vote Common Good, the New Evangelicals. There are all these different, or Faithful America. All these different organizations are trying to work on this stuff, faith-based organizations, and perhaps they have support for these pastors in ways that I don't. But I think that what these pastors really want is someone to listen and empathize with their plight.
You imagine they have very few people they could talk to about this. I think I read one of these pastors say, I might get these people for an hour, 2 hours a week on a Sunday. Fox News has them for all the rest of the time, this whole right-wing ecosystem. And you can't
that's
compete with that.
Yeah, it's true.
This is a question from a viewer. The question is, who's the most dangerous Christian nationalist right now? Do you got a top 3 to 5 list?
No, because, it's the system that is the danger, not any particular individuals. I mean, it's really interesting. The movement is very good at cultivating leadership. And because it's organization driven, when one person falls out, we saw this with, who was it, Jerry Falwell Jr.
Jerry Falwell Jr., yeah.
There's plenty of others to take their place. I mean, there are a lot of very powerful leaders right now. I name a number of them in Power Worshippers and Money Lies in God, and for that matter, in Good News Club. I think about, some of the people like Leonard Leo, who is very powerful in that sphere. I think about people like Bob McEwen, who is very powerful in the networking sphere. I think about people like Ralph Reed, who's got that sort of Faith and Freedom Coalition, who is a very very smart strategist of the movement, or people like Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council, Charlie Kirk, who is like a sort of up and coming as a really vital youth leader. But there are so many others that I write about. I almost feel bad naming any particular individuals because there are just so many.
Do you I think I just have one last question for you here. Do you ever wish you could spend a couple years writing about something happier?
Thank you. Well, I honestly, yeah, like wouldn't life be nicer if I could write about like the secret life of trees or something like
Right?
that? But here's the thing. This movement is fascinating. It seized control of one of our two major political parties. I don't think you can understand what's happening in American politics without understanding this movement and its people. So, and I would be lying if I said that I didn't derive some pleasure from writing about it. I do. I think that I'm an investigative journalist at heart. I love going into the spaces and seeing on the ground what's happening, and that it maybe pleasure is the wrong word, but it's interesting. It's
And it's
really
informing people, and there's
interesting.
value to that. I'm not
Right.
an investigative journalist. I'm merely a commentator, but that's the same thing. Like, it's not that I'm taking joy in any of this, but I do appreciate having a platform where I can try to inform other people about this very serious, very important movement that is happening. That, like you said, a lot of people don't even know it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is that people are people everywhere. So a lot of the people I meet in these spaces, like members of the rank and file, a lot of them are really nice people. They love their families. They care about their communities. They do believe they're doing what's best for America. They see themselves as righteous patriots. But all of their well meaning efforts are being harnessed in service of an agenda that is polarizing our country, making it unreasonable, you know, sort of inculcating large numbers of Americans in untruths and propaganda and driving support for an anti-democratic agenda. And I feel like that's deeply concerning.
Well, thank you so much for your time here. Um, I've had a chance to read the book.
You know,
I don't want to say it's good because it's horrifying. It is informative and fascinating. And if you're not familiar with the names and ideas that are circulating and really forming a basis for our country that is really scary, you should absolutely read it. It's called Money, Lies, and God Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. Thank you so much, Katherine Stewart.
thank you so much, Hammett.
All right. We're going to end the stream now. If you have any questions or comments, you could leave them. Otherwise, thank you for joining us.